You're listening to Quorum Radio.
Debra, when you were 14, and this came out in your book, You Weren't Depression's Victim, you had a brush with suicide, a suicide attempt. And at that time, your family was living in Texas. I remember that you mentioned that you had an exchange student that was living in the house at the time, and he went missing, and it threw the family into a tumult. Tell us about what happened, and tell us about what happened when you basically felt you were at the end of your rope.
Up until that point, I had felt very much like an odd man out in my family. I looked at things differently. I had different viewpoints than everybody else in the family. And so I had learned to back off and keep silent a lot. I also had been suffering from acute insomnia for quite a while up until that point. So, things kind of built and built and built. And when this situation happened, when our exchange student went missing, I went, okay, maybe I can step up here. Maybe there's something I can do. And I stepped outside of how I always had done things, which was stay back. And I got active. I got on the phone. I called everybody that I knew, trying to find him, and couldn't. He'd just taken off and had a good time. And so, when the family got back together, I reported in, I've done this and this and this, and I'm sorry I couldn't do anything. And my family went ballistic. And I was stunned because, I'd really stepped up. I'd really stepped out. I really tried. I made an effort to help the family.
Take some initiative, unlike kids who tend to be just, I'll just let mom and dad take care of it, and I'll continue watching TV,
or whatever. And, when everybody got on my case, seriously got on my case, I went, okay, number one, this is a mistake. Number two, it's hopeless. Number three, I can't make any difference here. And there was just incredible crush of spirit. And I went back to my room. I had my own room at that point. And I had sleeping pills because of my depression, and I downed them.
Wow.
And, I want to say right off here that there is a misperception out there about people who try and commit suicide or who do take their lives. The misperception is they are selfish. They're not thinking of anybody but themselves. Shame on them, that kind of perception. And that's been around for a very long time. And I can tell you, as someone who's been through this and been on that side, that has nothing to do with what's happening. There is no thought that goes on about anything. What there is an overwhelming crush of helplessness and hopelessness. And all you see is this dark tunnel. It's always going to be this way, and there's nothing you can do about it. And the pain is so excruciating that you just want out. You want away from the pain. And that's what people do. That's what happens when somebody tries to commit suicide, or they do. They're not thinking. There is no thought.
Wow. So then what happened?
In our family, we had two lines, the phone lines, the parents' line and the kids' line. My brother and sisters and I had that line. And so I went back in my bedroom, did what I did. And it seemed like a very short period of time, a friend of mine called me, a girlfriend, and I told her what I'd done. And she talked with me for a minute, and then she got off the phone, and unbeknownst to me, she called another friend who told her parents, and that friend called me back and kept me talking until my parents came in. And because of those young women, I'm still here.
Wow, thank God for that. Wow, so then all of a sudden this thing escalated from an exchange student that your parents were responsible for to, my gosh, our daughter made a suicide attempt. Then,
Yeah,
so pretty soon you found yourself, I guess, in the hospital, the emergency room.
I did.
What unfolded between yourself and your parents and your family from that point on?
It was interesting. In the emergency room or wherever we were, somewhere in the hospital or where we were waiting or whatever, I remember my dad saying to me, "I love you." And I remember thinking at that time, I wish you'd said that sooner and more often. That my parents were not demonstrative. They loved us, absolutely. There wasn't a question about that. But we almost were never told that. And we rarely saw them being affectionate with each other. So there was this kind of, I don't want to say a void, but lack of
Demonstrative
yes.
regard.
Yeah. And, afterwards we went home and we never talked about it again. Now, one thing did happen, my parents, it turns out they didn't know what to do with me. They never knew what to do with me, but even especially after this. And so they took me to Houston to see I don't know if he was a therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist, I don't know. But they didn't tell me that's where we were going or what we were going to do. And it was the same building as my ophthalmologist was. So I went, okay, great, we're just, going there. But we got off at a different floor, different office. And as we got up to the office, I saw the name on the door and what he was. And I was like,
Uh-oh.
And that was it. And I went in and said nothing. I was in shock. And then we went home and nothing was ever said again. And
wow.
I talked to my brother recently and, he has read the book and he said, I got to tell you, he said, I never knew. I said, how could you know? We never talked about it. He says, I kind of isolated, upstairs and, and doing my thing. And I had no idea this had gone on.
Right. And so basically it was kind of like dealt with like, okay, we'll take Debra to the psychologist in Houston.
And she'll get fixed.
Right. What comes through this is, you see your family, they try to strike me as doers and not talkers, and that they engage with the problem, but oftentimes maybe not intuitively. I don't know. Maybe I'm missing it.
No, I come from a family of type A's and serious type A's, and they're definitely doers.
Right. So then, of course, your brother, was the kind of like the star child in the family of four, right? You had four siblings in total,
and he was number one.
And the oldest, and the one who always did it right,
and the only boy. So yeah.
Oh wow. Okay. Wow. So then, so what are the lessons? By the way, this one of the little details that comes out looking at your book is that you mentioned that prior to that, you had your family lived in another location. You had a little safe kind of a nature space that you could go to and that was gone. Right.
Yeah. It was a place I used to escape to. I was often odd man out. And so looking back years later, I realized I'd been dealing with depression probably since age 2. That's as far back as I could take it. And I didn't have a language to speak what that was. I only knew that I was just desperately sad a lot, but covered it up. Nobody knew. And times it would get so much, I just had to get away from everyone and everything. And I would go to that spot because it was hidden, but like hidden in plain sight. And it was a safe place to go because I lived in a small town and it was a different time and nobody worried about their kids, They went, go out and play, go out, ride your bike,
Oh yeah, sure.
It was a different time. And
Yeah. So, by the way, you do this after school. When would you go on Saturdays? When would you go to
whenever I
that
could, yeah,
nature spot?
yeah, whenever I could,
It's sunny, warm, I guess. Beautiful colors, beautiful trees, and things like that. Nature, kind of
Yeah.
special.
Yeah.
And you lost that, and then what happened. So, and how did things evolve from that point on? Because you started to obtain insights and lessons. I think there are lessons, as life goes on, you deal with problems and then you start to develop and obtain insights. What were some of the lessons, some of the insights that you obtained looking back that influenced you in your struggle to engage with depression and to basically kind of find a way to rise above it? What were some of the lessons from that 14-year-old little girl?
Well, there's a lot.
Suicide attempt.
I mean, I tell people in my life, I love you all the time, all the time.
Oh, wow.
Make sure I say it before I hang up almost every phone conversation or when I leave somebody.
Sure.
It's important, and people are surprised when that happens, and then they go, "Oh yeah, okay, we love you too." Now they're used to it, they're used to that.
Wow.
But people don't say that often enough. And I mean it. It's not like just something I say. But we need to hear it. We need to hear it. And
Sure.
also, I was a very painfully shy kid growing up. And like depression, I learned to mask it very, very well. When I've started talking about this, as I was getting close to the book being finished and getting it published and started talking about, my life with depression, everybody that's known me my whole life was shocked because nobody knew.
Oh,
People who
amazing.
People who suffer with depression, by and large, have learned to mask it a lot. And
Right. Wow.
yeah, and yet a huge percentage of the population in this country has depression in some form or another. Some form or another.
Oh, wow. So, yeah, and in families, it's kind of like the incubator for good things and also things that aren't so good that come through. And how's your relationship now with them? Your brother's alive.
Yeah.
I think your parents said that. Okay,
all
great.
my
So then,
but what
was it? Yeah. Condolences. What was the reception like among your siblings for this book? They all read it, I assume, right?
So far, they haven't told me much. My brother's the only one that's commented so far. But, I did not share anything about the book with any of my family members. And they were like a huge in-breath. They were so worried. It was going to be a be-all, tell-all expose.
Yeah, right. Yeah, sure.
I kept telling them it's not going to be that. And I went to extraordinary lengths to make sure that it wasn't that. I had a couple of examples in there of situations that occurred that I made sure that I didn't identify he, she, because I wouldn't identify who it was.
But who said, when they said it? Yeah. Identifying details.
Yeah. And that person called me, after reading the book and said, what did you learn, that lesson? And I said, this is what I learned. And they said, really? Even with me? I said, yeah, even with you.
Oh my gosh. So then, and as time goes by, you started to see certain elements in daily life that could really be helpful and extremely important to be able to deal with depression. Because depression, it's a big problem, and it's a $1 billion issue in our country.
It is,
in the world.
and there are a couple of things I want to say about that. A lot of what happens when people go into depression, it can be situational. Somebody says something or doesn't say something, or they accuse you of something that you did or didn't do, or something happens that's a huge disappointment you were expecting and didn't happen. And we have this perception of what that means. And that perception drives us down that tunnel to depression. It's not usually just the thing that happened. It's what we think about it and what it means.
Sure, absolutely. It's like what people say to you.
Yeah.
And what do you think about what they said?
Right.
And I think what happens is that people, really thrust into depression. They start to believe all the negativity.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes,
Yeah.
And so, right now, so something I have to mention before we continue with that is that, you've discovered a couple of things. One is you see the redwood trees in my background, right? Because for a while, you went from being a Texas girl to a California girl.
Yeah.
And nothing against Texas. Texas is an amazing state. But you go to California, you get the redwoods, something you don't find too much in the central part of the country.
I know.
And that was special for you. And also, you realize that not only is nature great, but it's great when you have a little companion. And so you had a dog named Magic, not pictured in the photo.
No,
but
the picture in the photo is my current dog, Selby.
Selby, right? So you discovered nature accompanied by, dogs. Your dog Magic. Why is a dog so special? And how does it help a person who's dealing with depression?
When you are dealing with depression, you are you are always centered on yourself. How you feel, what you think, what is happening, what isn't happening, what you can see, what you can't see, helpless, hopeless, all the emotionality of it. It's all here, right here. When you have a pet, you have to take the attention off yourself and put it on them. You're suddenly responsible for another being. And I remember when I got Magic. I'd had a dog before, years before. My dog Tassie. I had her many, many years before that. But I lived alone for a long time, and I was dealing with depression because I had chronic fatigue and could do nothing. And as I began to recover from chronic fatigue, I realized that I needed to take the attention off of me. I went, it's time to get a dog, because the dog will get me out in nature. I will have to walk the dog. And I will be responsible for something else, their well-being, care, etc. And being responsible for something besides just my day-to-day gets not just your focus, but your energy moving.
Right.
And not only that, you give all your love to this other creature. Again, takes the attention off of you and how you're feeling. A lot of people, after COVID hit, a lot of people decided, since they were going to be home, it was time to adopt a furry friend. And it was a wonderful wave that hit the shelters. And a lot of dogs found homes that might not have.
Wow. And people discovered how great dogs are with their unconditional love. They need some help. Nothing against cats. Cats can be great too.
Yeah.
But pets, and especially dogs, they're affectionate. They seem to care about us, and they like to reach out to us because they really appreciate the love that we give them, and they give it back. Dogs are very, some people feel uncomfortable with dogs because they're so slobbering and they jump on you, but that's great.
As a matter of training, I'm sorry. It's just a matter of training,
Right. But it's good. But you don't want to train it. You don't want to train it out of the dog too much, because
you can't.
It's the beauty of the dog.
No, you can't. You can't. Not if you train them well. And I've trained my dogs. My dogs have PhDs in training.
Well, that's great. So Debra, what are some of the lessons that family members, friends, caregivers, teachers, need to have, things that they need to know to be able to help with depression? And so that doesn't end up becoming like a situation where you're talking about, an attempted suicide or a suicide that's
Yeah.
happens.
There are a couple of things that I would say. Number one is for the friends, parents, pay attention. Is the kid actively participating in the family? With me, I was staying as much in the background as I could, and it wasn't possible to do really, but I didn't offer opinions very much. Conversations, my brother and my father would talk a lot, and my mom and I, there was this kind of wall that I put up. So be aware of that. Are they spending a lot of time separate? I was encouraged to do things, but and I did, I jumped into music, into choir, because it was an outlet that I was the only one in the family that was doing. And that was a wonderful thing. But, tell your kids you love them. Tell them often, whether they want to hear it or not, whether they go, oh my God. No, tell them anyway. That's key for kids. They don't hear it often enough. They just don't.
Sure. And then it's also so important to get that contact with nature, to intervene sometimes. Like your friends, they intervened with you. Wow.
Yeah.
That thing of, you can't step out. No, well, why not? It can be life-saving.
It can be life-saving. There's many times I hear people say, well, I'm just one person, what can I do? Well, one person saved my life. One person
Absolutely.
doing the right thing saved my life. So one person makes a huge difference.
Right. The initiative is so important in our relationships with people, and we should never think that, I'm just not capable of making a difference. You can, and Debra Atlas, you're proof of it. And your book, You Aren't Depression's Victim, is kind of a tribute to initiative, taking initiative to deal with a really serious problem, which affects a lot of people. And can be devastating. So thanks a million for it, Debra. We want to be able to talk to you again about other important episodes that took place on your journey towards success with dealing with depression.
Thank you very much.